May I speak in the name of God, our Creator, Redeemer, and life-giving Spirit. Amen. Whichever way we look at it, it would be hard to say that the job description that Jesus gives his disciples as he sends them out stands up to close scrutiny. In an age where those of us in the working world are told we must always make sure we're setting smart objectives for people, they must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, well, Jesus' instructions seem anything but pretty much any of those. Challenge evil spirits, take nothing but a staff, don't take a bag, food, money, not even a spare coat, and go. Jesus also says very little about exactly what the disciples are to do when they arrive wherever it is that they're going. It's not clear what they're to say, but they're to stay all the while that people will listen to them. And that's about it. He's speaking, of course, to his disciples back in his hometown of Nazareth. And if detailed instructions are not forthcoming, then of course they have just seen Jesus in action. They've seen him doing the sort of teaching that he's encouraging them to go out and do for themselves. And they've also seen the results. The people in his home synagogue hear him and they're astounded, but not, it turns out, in a good way. They find it hard to understand where he's gained all these new insights and ideas, and they're offended. It's all too much for them. After all, they've known his humble beginnings, his ordinary family background, and frankly, they're not impressed. And Jesus, in his turn, is amazed at their unbelief. Astounded, offended, and amazed. Three reactions of people to Jesus, Jesus to the people, and reactions that speak of confrontation and of challenge. So how, I wonder, are the disciples feeling now? They could be forgiven for looking at Jesus and thinking that this has hardly so far been a spectacular success. As far as they can see, astounded, offended, and amazed can only add up to one or maybe three of three things. First, failure. After the encounters they've witnessed as Jesus has toured Galilee, there's been the healing, the teaching, the telling stories, there's even been stilling of the storm. They've now returned to Nazareth and it's all gone wrong. The story is unraveling before their very eyes. This is failure, surely writ large. Second, we have rejection. We have rejection because the crowd simply don't want Jesus, the son of Mary and the brother of the young men and women they all know around the town. They simply don't want him, this upstart, coming and telling them what they should believe and how they should live their lives. So they take offense. And third, and possibly worst of all, we have indifference. Despite having the very presence of Jesus, the Son of God, in their midst, despite the words of truth and insight and understanding that he's offering them, the words and the prophetic deeds that show signs of extraordinary hope and possibility, all the people can do is show indifference. That sense of, you're all right, thanks, we're not going to allow ourselves to be challenged by what you say, we'd rather you just went away and left us to live our own way. And Jesus says to his disciples, well, you've now seen all this, so off you go. There's no sugar-coating, there's no pep talk. I sometimes wonder in this week of great sporting events, when we look at all the things we see on the courts at Wimbledon or on the football field, what sort of sports psychologists must say to people that gives them the encouragement that when they've lost, what was it yesterday, their 8th game against an unknown 18-year-old, they suddenly find it within themselves to pick themselves up and win a game again. Well, whatever they say to those sports stars, Jesus wasn't saying any of it to the disciples. Just off you go. He does say that if people don't want to hear you, Then shake the dust from your feet and move on. Shake the dust from your feet, metaphorically and physically. Don't allow the mud to stick to you as you try to do the work to which you've been called. Just keep going. So what about us? What, I wonder, do we fear most when we try to live out our discipleship? Is it the indifference of the world around us? Is it the fear that we'll open our mouths to say something about our belief in God, our belief that God really is alive, active in the world now, only to face rejection for saying those things? Or is it that we're all used to studying and training and preparing ourselves for success, be it in our working lives, our studies, our hobbies, whatever it may be that we care about, and then we get unnerved when we remember that there are moments, even in the life of Jesus himself, when it all looked like it was turning into a mess? What hope then is there really for us if failure is only that far away? Well, as we try to navigate our way as individuals and as a community towards the directions of travel that are going to be our response to Jesus' instructions to get out into the world 2 by 2, we need to look very closely at the example of Jesus before us in the gospel story today. Because in telling his disciples to prepare for the worst, in showing them the realities of failure, rejection, and indifference, what he's also showing them, and therefore all of us, is that it's okay to be vulnerable, and that our vulnerability need never define us. In telling us the importance of shaking off the dust from our feet, Jesus is reminding us of 3 things. First, that it isn't down to us to try to do everything in every situation. Sometimes it's fine to realize that there will always be those who simply don't want to hear what we have to say. Second, that when we do shake off the dust and move on, God keeps on working. And we can therefore trust and have confidence that out of the dust we leave behind, new possibilities will emerge in the lives of other people about whom we can't possibly know the full story. And the third thing is that reminder that we're never, ever solely defined by the sum total of our failures. That keeping on going, trusting in God and trying again is central to our calling. Trying new ways of communicating, finding the points of connection, the resonances with the people around us, the world outside church, showing how much we do care about the big issues, the big questions of our time, the environment, people's gender identity, sexuality, race, identity in its broadest sense, the longing we all have for God's people to find fullness of life in every aspect of their lives, however advantaged or disadvantaged they may be. Showing that all these things matter to us too, and that we place our trust in the God who walks with us as we try to make sense of the world, and as we try to keep faith with the community in which we are set. In the summer of 2016, I found myself addressing a meeting of some 75 people or so in Vietnam. It was my first outing with a new client. I'd shown the client all my slides, my PowerPoints were perfect. I thought we'd agreed everything that I would be saying, and off I went. I remember it so clearly. I was standing in one of those enormous rooms in the middle of a sort of U shape of the audience, so 75 people gathered around. I could see them, they could see me. And as I was speaking, the chair of the meeting, who was sort of sitting straight down at the back, became more and more disquieted and started to show his anger and displeasure. And then he sort of interrupted me and just said how much he disagreed with everything I was saying. And one by one, everybody else around this ring of 75, the front row, started to join in. I looked across at my client and thinking, well, at least I've agreed with him what we're doing, so this should surely be all right. And he said, I agree with the chair, Jonathan. I simply don't understand why you're saying these things. The very things on the PowerPoints that we'd agreed a few hours earlier was what we were going to talk about. I can tell you I have never felt so alone. The level of anger in the room was rising, and when I finally slumped down in my seat at the end of it, I felt three things: failure, rejection, and indifference. Failure because as a consultant, I simply hadn't delivered. Rejection by the angry audience who hated everything I'd been saying. And indifference, the indifference of the back rows of the people who'd been carrying on doing their emails on their laptops and didn't care enough even to notice what was happening at the front. That was 5 years ago. And last week, I went through probably my 20th presentation with the same client, the one who'd hung me out to dry so memorably in front of all those people, who over the time I've got to know better, and who at the end of our call this week, as he always does nowadays, finished by saying how much he enjoys our conversations and how much he enjoys working together. Failure, rejection, and indifference over time transformed into a relationship of trust, exploration, and new discoveries as we find new ways of working together. A reminder perhaps for all of us as we journey outwards into the world, bearing God's message of love for all of humankind, that we're never alone, and that whatever befalls us, we can place our trust in the new possibilities that God works tirelessly to open up all around us. Amen.